PowerPoint if you want to go out and look at some of these examples of microlearning on your own. And then the last one, of course, is the micro lesson. And what distinguishes the micro lesson from the other kinds of microlearning is the interaction. A lot of Captivate, a lot of Camtasia, little sort of interactive programs that concentrate on not too many things, but help us, help us get things done. So with that and no more ado, I would like to introduce you to my very distinguished panel this morning. And the first person is Dr. Jo Taylor, who is an assistant professor at Penn State University. She has a lot of experience in human resources and in multinational environments. She is a wonderful person. Joe and I hit it off right away. She has a devout interest in learning, and when you meet people like that and you are in the same frame of mind yourself, it's kind of like your own kind. So with that, I would like to introduce Joe. And Joe, can you just tell us a little bit about yourself?
Sure. No problem. I'm going to assume that everybody can hear me fine. My little bars are going up and down as I speak, so I think I'm well connected here. I've been working at Penn State for about 6 years, and I'm in the final throes of tenure, so I'm a little bit overwhelmed at the moment, but delighted to be here to talk a little bit about microlearning. My background is in organizational development. I've cycled through a number of Fortune 500 companies in my first career, and now have made this transition based on getting an advanced degree in adult learning and organizational leadership at Columbia to take on a full-time faculty position. I think we've been doing microlearning for a long time. In fact, I kind of think it is the way we learn, and my comments today are going to be connected to my research, which is around storytelling, in particular storytelling in organizational settings, and around the reflective process that adult learners use to learn.
Hello? Hello, I can hear you. Okay, I can hear too.
I can hear.
I can hear.
I can hear.
Okay. Good.
All right, folks, can you hear me now?
Yes.
Okay, good. Good. I have no idea what happened to the audio. We will move on here, though, because we know what that's like. So I'm going to promote you to presenter. Joe, I'm going to promote you folks to presenter, and we will see what goes on from there. Okay, John, would you like to tell us a little bit about yourself and your background in IT and instructional design?
Sure. Good afternoon, everybody. Sorry, I'm losing my voice.
Okay, I just lost all the audio.
I can hear you.
Okay,
I can hear.
good. Thank you. Thank you. John, are you there, John? All right, well, we'll move on to Robin, and then we can come back to John. Robin DeFelice is a professor, an adjunct professor in my program. She teaches our instructional design course, and Robin has at least a decade of experience in instructional design and multimedia. Robin, can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you.
Okay. Would you like to give us a couple minutes on your background, and hopefully we'll get this audio straightened out here?
Sure. I think I might be able to fill 30 seconds.
This is good.
Sure, no problem. Interestingly enough, John Caputo and I went to Bloomsburg University together and graduated at the same time. So John is actually a cohort member of mine. So it's really nice to be able to professionally now be on the other side, working alongside John, doing a presentation today. I think this is quite fun, and it's really nice to see a photo of his adorable son. As for myself, I've been an instructional designer, as Bobby said, for over a decade. I've worked for nonprofit economic development groups as an employee, and then I moved on to doing consulting and contracting on my own. And from there, I did, like project management and teaching the whole instructional design skills, working, at the higher end of the organizational chain, helping out departments to formulate their training needs, whether it was to expand the department or look at new ways in which to develop training for the department. I've also worked for pharmaceuticals, such as, it was Wyeth, I think now it's Pfizer, Bristol Myers Squibb. Also worked for some major health insurance companies such as Cigna. I've also worked for some hospitals in Chicago and in Pennsylvania as well. A lot of the times I'm more on the higher end of looking at repurposing content and how to use it in different ways. I'm also looking at the learning styles and the learning methods, and I'm very big into analysis. So as some folks are more onto the technology side and seeing how things can be developed from the technology piece, I have a high respect and enjoy learning about it, but I really look at a lot of the analysis and the evaluation of the effects and impact that training has.
Great, thanks. John, are you with us now? Can you give us 2 seconds on your background, and then let's get on to the questions, because we have a lot of questions this morning.
Sure. Can you hear me, Bobby?
I can hear you.
Okay, great. Hi, folks. My name is John Caputo. I'm an instructional designer at LaSalle. I come from more of a corporate background and what I would consider more of a jack-of-all-trades instructional designer. Design, develop, make coffee. I do whatever needs to get done to get the job done. Also play a bit of ukulele, as illustrated by my photo. And I've used microlearning in a couple of courses I've taught for Bobby. And I find it very fun and certainly has some pros and cons to it, which I'm sure we'll get to. So thanks, Bobby.
All right, so on with our first question here. What defines microlearning? Does it have evaluation? And if it doesn't have evaluation, can we call it learning? Who would like to field that from the panel? Who would like to volunteer? John.
Can I field my own question?
Why don't you try this one?
So yeah, I mean, this is just something I was mulling around the other day, and we'll go back to like your example of your daughter, looking up how to make mashed potatoes on YouTube, right? And so that's definitely educational. She had a problem. She said, hey, I need to make mashed potatoes so I can eat, and so she went out and found instruction that she was able to follow, and I assume she made mashed potatoes and had dinner. So therefore, it was at least effective and translated to a measurable result. But so okay, that's cool. So it does have evaluation, but how in the devil how do you manage that? How do you realize that like people actually were able to follow your tutorial and do what they were supposed to do because of it? And so, I mean, if we kind of continue on the YouTube sort of variant, to me, I mean, anything that you call learning has to have some method of evaluation, and maybe there is evaluation built into our mashed potato example. I mean, in the way of YouTube's comments, and it sort of becomes a social self-policing learning, and so that folks will just chime in on the comments and say, hey, this works, this is a great thing, and I successfully made mashed potatoes, or I ended up with a burned pan and no dinner and I starved, and had to order pizza. And so, as the content author, I guess you can certainly check in on that and see if what you're putting out there is working, and then you can make adjustments because of it. It's certainly not what I would consider a typical method of evaluating content from a corporate standpoint, but certainly it's got all the hallmarks that you need to really illustrate and measure actual application and skill learning. So I mean, I don't know if that's really an answer to the question, but I think it's an interesting observation on the way social media leads to evaluation if you want to leverage it that way. Anybody else want to chime in?
Yeah, I was pass this to Robin or Joe, who wants to take a stab at it next.
Oh, I keep forgetting to raise my hand.
Okay, who is it? Robin, are you going to try this?
Yeah. I'm sorry. I forget because I'm on the phone to raise my hand, so my apologies. Well, I just want to piggyback a little bit on what John was saying, and I really like how he was talking about the comments. And what I think of when I start to think about evaluation and I start to think about like the help I went and looked for maybe on Microsoft's page, and it said, there was just one quick question to you. It said, did this help? Did this information help? And you could say yes or no. And sometimes when you say no, there's a comment box. And it could be if you really needed or were concerned about getting some evaluation, maybe something as simple as that could be instituted. So it's similar to the comments. So that's all I wanted to provide on addition to that.
Good. Joe, you want to chime in on this?
Sure. I guess the thing that makes me curious about this is the distinction that I kind of pull from John's comments about the distinction between evaluating the teaching or the training, right, the media, the sort of message, and evaluating the learning. So if your daughter made mashed potatoes and she can make them again and she's satisfied with her mashed potatoes, then I think we have her evaluating her own learning, right? If she goes to comment on the YouTube to give some feedback about her learning and the role that the YouTube played in her learning, then we're getting some feedback that's useful from a design and development standpoint for the training. And so I see those two things as different. And I think that there's a, based on my own work, I mean, I think there's a reflective piece in there in terms of your daughter synthesizing the mashed potato process to the point where she can replicate it again, perhaps even without going back to the YouTube video. And in that case, her ability to do it without ever accessing that learning module, that learning object again, is testimony, I think, to its success.
Yeah, no, I like those comments. I agree with that. Folks, anybody else have anything in the chat that they want to add? Any questions that they want to ask on our first question here, which was what defines microlearning? Feel free to ask questions in the chat, and our panelists will certainly and try to answer it. If not, we are going to move on because we have a lot of really good questions here this morning. All right, second question, and we will go in reverse order. So, Joe, you can take this first. What's the relationship between microlearning and storytelling? Is storytelling microlearning, or does storytelling help to contextualize microlearning, or both, or neither? What is the pattern of connections between microlearning segments, linear, cyclical, spiral, rhizomatic, something else altogether? Is there no pattern of connections? I love this whole thought pattern, Joe. So we're going to turn to you first, and then we'll go Robin and John and see what you folks have to say.
All righty, thanks, Bobby. This is always dangerous, having me talk about this in a time-compressed format. So at some point you may want to get the hook here. Just a little bit of background. There's some literature out there on the connection between narration, storytelling, and microlearning. And when you read that literature, I think of people like Thomas Hugg, for example. When you read that literature, you need to make a distinction or look carefully at the distinction that the authors are making in terms of their operational definition of what they mean by storytelling and narration. So a lot of times the idea of storytelling as a construct built into microlearning objects is Thomas Hugg talks about, for example, comic strips, right, as complex storylines of microlearning, and that you can build in that kind of simple story-based exchange into a microlearning module. You might see it on a YouTube. You might see it in a small case example or a simulation. The kind of storytelling I'm talking about is actually the kind of storytelling that we do as human beings as a very sort of natural order of things. It's the oldest form of oral communication that we have. It's our most natural way to engage each other. And it's a process that helps us reflect and synthesize, make sense of, and meaning out of our experience in the world. So people we tell our stories to listen to us, ask us questions, make us smarter about our own stories. Our stories also inform their ways of learning. And our storytelling can be very short. It can be very compressed. And it can be captured in these sort of online modalities, things like YouTube. There's a whole discipline of digital storytelling that's really, if you're interested in a reference, if you look up Joseph Lambert out in California, he's done a lot of work on digital storytelling and how we capture and make sense of experience in digital formats. And these kinds of things can be quite brief, right, in the spirit of microlearning. I think the other side of this is that we talk about our learning, right? We incorporate our learning into stories that we tell other people as we start to apply that learning in the world. And so this is where I start to wonder about the kind of rhythm that we strike between learning in these very small segments, right? These little micro segments. And we accumulate these microsegments over time. We make sense of the way these puzzle pieces kind of fit together in our practice, in our day-to-day living, depending upon the sort of scale of the content. And what I'm curious about is the way we use storytelling, explaining our learning to other people, the way we kind of story the pattern of that learning, so that not only we understand it, but we can convey with some depth what that experience has been like for the benefit of other people. And I wonder about whether these things are sort of linear trajectories. We learn 2 or 3 pieces, we put them together, how reflexive they are. We learn 5 pieces and we sort of forget about the first one until in the 6th piece, something comes back to us and we say, that was it. And it may take us off on this sort of rhizomatic tangent, some tendril that we didn't even anticipate. And we see that in YouTube examples, right? When you're looking for your mashed potatoes And up on the sidebar, it says, here's some other related videos, and one of them's on Brussels sprouts. And you're like, whoa, let me go do the Brussels sprout thing. And you had never planned to cook Brussels sprouts, So then there's a story there about how you put together this, vegetarian repast of potatoes and Brussels sprouts. So that's kind of the generation of my thinking there, and I'm very curious about it, so I'm going to be quiet now and hear if you can give me a little micro lesson of our own.
I'm going to pass it on next to John, because Robin's going to field the next question. I'm going to pass this on to John. I think you bring up some great points, and the point of rhythm in learning, the point of breaking things into small segments, and does it inhibit us or aid us in developing that rhythm? John, what do you think about storytelling?
Yeah, it's funny because I was just sort of thinking about this a little bit last week as I look at some of our own training offerings here at LaSalle, and how to get content out faster to folks and make it available when they need it. But also then how do you tie it all back together and make it look like you planned it to be a large, training initiative or curriculum. Honestly, this one really has me scratching my head. I think it's important to have consistency between things, but just the idea of micro learning as a means of developing things quickly and developing things that are to some degree expendable, in that, if you only have a little 2-minute video on how to make mashed potatoes, let's just keep talking about food since it is lunchtime. If you suddenly discover that, hey, you know what, I don't like mashed potatoes anymore, now I like mashed sweet potatoes, and that's where you should be, well, you're not going to go and update your little YouTube video on mashed potatoes. You're just going to throw it away and film a new one in its entirety on how great mashed sweet potatoes are. And so now, how did you know you were going to make that jump to a totally different, nutritional value food like sweet potatoes when you were originally just thinking, hey, I'm going to film mashed potatoes? And so I don't know if you can. It's just one of those things. I don't know if you really can string things that are true individually packaged bits of learning in such a short format together to create something that's a whole, or do you end up looking after the fact and then trying to sort of weave together a path? I look at what I did for our Blackboard 9 training, Blackboard 9.1 training, and for those folks who are wondering, we just went to Blackboard 9.1, which was an experience in itself and its own web conference that would take 3 weeks to talk through. And what I basically did is Blackboard provided a lot of little small individual nuggets for us, and so that it was like, hey, here's a little Captivate on using this one tool, and it was 3 minutes, and then here's another Captivate on using this tool, and it's 3 minutes, and so they were just all thrown out there, individually self-sufficient pieces that I then said, well, all right, these are all awesome individually, but how do I get a path through for faculty members to really understand what they're looking at, what they're doing, where to start, where they're going to end up with, what's relevant, what's not relevant, and so I kind of sketched out, so to speak, our story, after the fact, but, fully realizing that I'm not going to go back and update any of these modules. If a new one comes out, I'm just going to throw away the old one and plop the new one in, which may have different learning objectives and therefore change the way my story is structured. And I'm kind of willing to accept that for numerous resource reasons, but, is it the best way to do it? I don't know, but that's kind of how to me, that's how I would approach it, in that I would look to create the story after the fact, which I don't know if that's right or wrong, but it's an approach.
Okay. Thank you very much. In an effort to keep on moving on here so that we get through at least the initial questions, because we have some great questions. Folks, feel free to jump into the chat area and get involved in the discussion with our panelists. You don't have to save your questions for the end, although we will have time for questions and answers at the end. Robin, this one's on you. We'll start with Robin this time. Are we addressing the correct audience with microlearning? The current trend is towards short communication, but are we following SADS as opposed to sound principles? Robin?
Well, I'll try to answer this the best I can, because I think that these questions are quite broad, and because we're not identifying a specific audience, of course, my mind instantly goes to assessment. Are we addressing the correct audience with microlearning? Well, who's the audience? First, we need to identify them, and then we need to identify what they're learning. So it could be those two issues right there telling us. So I guess I'm actually answering the end of the second question about sound principles, because I'm instantly drawn to using sound instructional design principles to address your question. And so I think, yes, we are still using some sound principles as long as we are identifying who our audience is. Now, granted, with the informal learning, maybe somebody just felt like putting up their mashed potato experience. So really that's the assumption that there's somebody out there somewhere that wants to know about how you make mashed potatoes. But if we were inside a professional arena, I would surmise that we are still using sound principles to identify whether or not the situation the learner's in, the environment that they're in, those type of things will, help us determine whether or not microlearning is something that's valuable. And then the trend with the short communications and that being microlearning in this context, it's not necessarily a fad. Again, if you're selecting topics that can be leveraged in a microlearning format, and it makes sense based on the other things that you analyze, that it would all go together cohesively. So I'm not quite sure if I'm answering these questions well, but because they're so broad in nature, and I didn't pull, honestly, an example to bring us through to a definitive answer, I'm trying to answer it on a broader level, which is we do use sound principles because I approached the question in that manner and was trying to answer it from that frame. But if you're doing informal learning, then these questions I don't necessarily know if they're relevant from that YouTube perspective. So if it was just me putting something up on how I like to crochet and how to start off crocheting, I might not necessarily follow any type of principle and just do it as a fad because everybody else is doing it.
Great. Thanks, Robin. We have commented in the chat that I'd like someone on the panel to address, and Sue, maybe you want to type a little bit more in there. I think the audience is only one component to consider when choosing a delivery medium and format. Would somebody like to reflect? The content is also important, e.g. the complexity.
Oh, absolutely. And Bobby, those are all great things, Sue, that you're pointing out. Those are all things that are definitely just part of sound instructional design principles. When you're assessing, you're taking the learner, who's one component, the audience, and then a delivery medium and a format. And those are all part of, that analytical process of making sure that training or microlearning is the right thing at the right time for the right audience. So that's a very good point.
Yeah, I would agree with that. I would agree with that 100%. Joe, do you have anything to add on this subject? Would you like to chime in here?
Well, it's interesting to me because when I read this question, I immediately went to conversations I've been having with people about multiple generations, right? Sort of multi-generationality, and this idea that, this new generation that's never grown up with computers has this sort of different neural wiring, and that they're not going to tolerate what we think of as traditional methods of learning. We've got a group of people in the middle, like myself, I suppose, who have certain preferences, but are enamored, have been kind of captured by technology and by more concentrated forms of information transfer, faster cuts, and so when I saw this notion of audience, rather than going to specific audiences for specific content in specific learning contexts relative to particular instructional goals and objectives, I went to this kind of, sort of a vaguer scale, I suppose, a more generalized scale of, do we have to be careful of who we're reaching if we're trying to reach particular kinds of people with specific kinds of micro-learning objects, how we convey them may be successfully may be very dependent, right, on understanding the generational connection to technologies. And always, I think you have to worry about sort of stereotyping and overgeneralizing.
Yeah, I agree with you. Chris brings this up in the chat that from a corporate perspective, microlearning works well for formal, rapid-to-deploy types of learning. However, there may be a generational slant. I think that is a point well taken. I also think the point to, to me, learning is learning. Some people may have some preferences in terms of the media or the method, but to make these global sweeps in terms of generations and to really emphasize that, I have some issues with that too. So moving along here, we're going to ask. This is one of my favorite questions, and I have done a fair amount of research on this myself, and I'm going to ask John to start with this question because I think it's come up a couple times. It comes up often. What is the role of reflection in microlearning?
Well, I think this kind of, and correct me if I'm taking this the wrong way. I mean, this ties back a little bit, I think, to my opening remarks on evaluation of microlearning. And that if it really is just based on the nature of it, you're trying to figure out, hey, did this really work for me? Is this applicable content to me? It's much more of a sort of audience selecting or a type of approach. I'm making the value judgment of whether this learning is applicable to me. Did I learn? Did it work for my learning style? If not, I can go find some other thing out there probably that is maybe more applicable to me, but still falls in the micro learning realm. So I would say it's kind of almost key to it. You're just really trying to get people to think and maybe get them off on a different path. I mean, because if you're looking at small little teeny reusable chunks, maybe 3 to 5 minutes, then you're not going to be giving them a full picture. You're just kind of getting their appetite wet and hoping that they go out and find more information about it. There's some interesting comments in the chat here. Motivation is motivation of the learner part of reflection. I mean, I think to me, like, microlearning all hits on the motivation of the learner because it's really just from the majority of things that are publicly accessible out there, from whether you want to learn to play the ukulele or learn how to make mashed potatoes or go learn how to make a garden box for your window. It's all about you wanting to learn something and just getting enough to get you started. And so really I think it is very much based upon one's self-motivation.
John, I'm going to pass it on to Robin. Robin, you want to chime in here?
Well, actually, I had promoted the idea about the motivation piece because John had triggered something in my head about motivation, and that's what I was questioning is does reflection at any point in learning, whether it's micro-learning or not, is it more prompted by the motivation of the learner themselves to continue to find more things? So that was just where it kind of went when he started discussing it. So that's the only thing I could really include or reaffirm is that I think, motivation here is what's going to drive this a little more. But then I think that would roll into a question of do we need to have that as a consideration, thinking about like the ARCS model of motivation, but do we need to be considering that as we're designing something, that do we need to motivate them to just reflect on what we gave or motivate them to go find more? So those are two things that kind of popped up for me.
Great, thank you. Yeah. Moving on here. Our next question to the panelists is, do you need an instructional designer to develop microlearning? Is it too short to apply traditional ID theory or the traditional ID-ADDIE model to it, or adult learning theory or any kind of learning theory? And I think that's one of the big questions here is, are we talking about short infomercials as opposed to instruction or something that has the intention to teach? So I'm going to open that up to Joe. Would you like to tackle that one?
I think that this sort of gets into this notion of kind of rapid instructional design, where you're really working with trade-offs between the work that you do on the design end and what you rely on in terms of sort of the instructional scene at the delivery side of things. And for me, I think microlearning makes that trade-off. It puts a lot of dependency on the learner to know what they want, when they want it, and to really understand how they're going to apply it. And so it's not necessarily that you don't need good design principles, but you may not need the kind of extended systematic design that we tend to think of when we think of very large training projects like the Blackboard program that John mentioned that he's just put together. So I think it's a question of really balancing the front end work of the design with making that shorter, making it sort of expediting that with a reliance on the intelligence and capacity of the learner and what's going on in the learning environment where he or she's situated.
Thanks. Again, in an effort to be aware of time here, because we do have a couple scenarios and I want to get to at least one of them, we're going to move on here and maybe skip this is a good question, though. We'll do this one and one more, and then we'll move to the scenarios. Do we make learning and therefore knowledge disposable? Is it too small? Can it hold, if it's so small, can it hold lasting value? I think this is an excellent question. The other part of that is we have so much of it thrown at us from all, and so do all learners from all different directions. So, Robin, would you like to try this one?
Sure. What kind of popped in my head about these questions here was just the idea that, there's probably never an intent for learning to be disposable. Maybe microlearning has an advantage of what John was giving an example on is that you can use it for now, but if it updates or changes, it's not such an arduous process to go back through and update it, and maybe it isn't the same. So I didn't put a lot of effort into the first time around, so it's not going to make me feel too bad that I have to go back and update it. So that's one perspective. But do I really think it becomes disposable? What I actually saw as an answer when I saw these questions was, I see it as it's becoming more portable, more accessible, and more timely, as opposed to maybe becoming, something that doesn't have lasting value. It has lasting value for the time in which it's needed, so just-in-time training, things like that. So that lasting value is there as long as it's needed for whatever the job task, learning piece is. So on the disposable side, I just think it's a beneficial aspect of just being portable, accessible, and timely.
Absolutely. All right, so let's field the rest of these here, and I'd like to have us tackle as a group a couple of these scenarios. So let's we only have about 10 minutes here. Let's take this first scenario and get some input from folks in the audience here and from our panelists on, would micro-learning be appropriate in this case? Let's say a group of senior employees have been doing accounting using Microsoft Excel for the past 10 years. If you have to introduce a new accounting software to them and get them to use it, you need to pick up one of their routine tasks and show them how to execute it using a new accounting software. More than anything, you need to tell them how using the new accounting software will help them work more efficiently and what are specific benefits which Microsoft Excel does not offer. If you do not communicate this clearly, they will never understand why they must explore a new product and they can't keep using Microsoft Excel. We all know, everybody in training and development knows this scenario. Who's ever done software and systems training knows this scenario. Can you create a micro-learning solution? I think this is an excellent example. In the chat,
we have some comments going on. I'm going to open up the audio, and I'm going to pick on John. John, I'm going to, you're living some of this right now with your board situation. So I'm going to let you tackle this one. What do you think?
Well, I mean, just kind of collection of stream of conscious thoughts. I think because if you look at the group, your target audience here, you've got senior employees. Okay, so they've been around the block a little bit. Assuming they've been using Excel for the past 10 years, one would hope they're relatively comfortable in it. And we're talking accounting, so we're talking accountants who generally understand, hopefully, making a lot of assumptions here, the principles surrounding the calculations and processes and results that they're doing here. So really we're just trying to take what they did know previously and apply it to the new software that we've got here. And that actual task probably isn't that hard, but the actual difficulty here is, as what's stated in the last sentence here, it's more the attitude change, the behavioral component that we say, hey, look, we're going to change things up for you, and we know everybody fears change, and so that's going to be the thing we're going to overcome. And so, maybe the approach here isn't necessarily, okay, I got to go do all this crazy software training. Maybe the micro lecture or micro learning solution is, okay, let's do a couple short pieces, illustrating the benefits and the gains that are going to come out of adapting to this. A little bit of maybe marketing, internal PR, never hurt. And then we do a quick series of micro learning modules on the exact task they're doing, how it's done in the new software, and this once again selling the saving and the benefit. And that's to me how I would initially approach it, not looking at it as, hey, it's this whole new big application that I need to train you on. It's like, well, no, you do your job and you're experienced. So let's just look at hitting essential little pieces that you need, that maybe the gotchas, the essential job task, and then send you on your way, let you work with it a little bit. Best way to learn software is to use software. So.
Great. We have some wonderful comments coming in down here in the chat. Would any of our learners like to take the microphone and chime in here? Can you create a micro-learning solution for this case? Joe, Robin, either one of you want to chime in before we move on real quickly to the other scenarios?
I would just, this is Joe, I would just support, John's approach. What you're really talking about is helping people understand their relationship with their work and the way that the software can mediate that. So running micro lessons through the lens of the task as opposed to the lens of the software is, I think, what could make micro learning objects successful.
Okay. Robin, do you have anything to add here? Noel has a question here. Micro-learning is effective for small tasks. Do I need to read the entire car manual if just like need to change the oil? Yeah, that's very well put. That's very well put. That's that point in time, that directed piece of that one answer for one question. Yeah, I like that. I guess my question for this, and I'll throw it out to Robin at the end, anybody who does corporate training, again, is it easier to get somebody to move to something new when they're happy where they are or when they're dissatisfied where they are? And what role does feelings play, One of the challenges with micro-learning is you can only get so many feelings going and so much relationship going in 2 to 3 minutes with an infomercial. So, Robin, would you like to jump in real quick there? Add anything?
I missed the last part. Something about an infomercial. It cut out.
Yeah, I mean, my question with can micro-learnings work in this situation? What role does feelings play in this kind of a project, where you have people who are happy with something, they like what they've got, and now all of a sudden you've got to get them to use something else?
I mean, at that point, I think that's rolling back into the discussion of motivation, that they're more motivated to stay with what they have, as there's that fear of learning something new. So I think that there's some things outside of microlearning that would have to happen, such as support from your managers, which I think might have been addressed, and just additional pieces that you're not going to see inside that microlearning. As John discussed, you're going to see discussion on benefit, but there has to be, I think, some type of external portion of support that remotivates that learner. I don't know if that quite addresses the question or not, but that's, I think, any piece of learning and any new piece of technology, if you don't have that support externally coming from management, manager, employer, whomever it is, it makes it even harder for people to buy in that there is a value to them to switch over.
Great. All right, the next case here. Would microlearning be appropriate in this case? There is a severe drought. Strict domestic water usage restrictions are in place. Your water utility company has invited you to design something to convince people to conserve water and abide by the restrictions. Fines are imposed on people who are caught watering their lawns, cars, and footpaths. Everyone is encouraged to take short showers and water gardens with laundry, rinse water. Many property owners feel it is their right to use water as they feel fit. Assuming that they or their families can gain access to your product, what would you design to turn these people around? And please don't suggest that the water company needs to change their policies. And, the question we're really asking here is this a case or a scenario where we could use microlearning? Who wants to tackle this one first?
I wouldn't mind. This is Robin. I instantly think of a picture, like those one image cartoons you get in the editorial section in the newspaper. You could do something like that, or a film strip piece, and I think this ties into Joe's storytelling, where the image could speak those 1,000 words, but the narration tells the story, maybe not in 1,000 words, but for example, the concept of visualizing and seeing what the water consumption they're doing in a negative way, how it impacts their community, and then, having somebody narrate or explain to that. So maybe it's a story of a child asking mom why they can't, run through the sprinklers or whatever it is, that I think that you could do microlearning with this and build an actual kind of more narrative type of story that gives them some type of ability to emotionally identify with the situation being presented.
Awesome. John's about to put something in chat and as an example here of a real-world solution that's been developed. I think you bring up some great points, Robin. I want to get to the last scenario, so we're going to ask Joe to probably address this one next. But I think you hit on one of the most important things here is in order to change action in this content, you're going to have to connect to people's feelings. There's no way around it. All right, our last case here is microlearning. In this case, would this be appropriate? Imagine you were working for a national retail grocery chain. New employees are generally between the ages of 17 and 22. For many, it is their first job. For the purposes of this challenge, you can assume that employees' intakes occur every 2 months, coordinated across the country. A computer for online training is provided at all stores, but employees can also access the learning resources from their home computers. The rules may state, for example, that the entrenchment occurs on the third incidence of tardiness, blah, 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 blah. So what we're really asking them for here is, can you create a microactivity that inspires young inductees with the benefits of being accountable for their actions and responsible to their fellow employees in the context of punctuality? All right. Joe, you want to start?
Sure, I can weigh in on this. I mean, I think this gets back to my generational comment. I think we're in the sweet spot here in terms of providing short and sweet, technology-oriented pieces of information. I would get them off the computer, though, and I'd get them into some handheld technologies. I'd try to make an app for that, that these learners can pull up, when they're on their break or whenever. And I think, similar to Robin's comments, I think this is tied into the storytelling. I think you want to show them the impact that their tardiness has on other parts of the system in the store, or what I guess store, so that they understand that they're part of a larger system and that people are depending on them in the same way that they depend on those other folks for coming in on time, relieving them on their shifts and that sort of thing. It's sort of turn the telescope around, so that they're just sort of getting a sense that they have the same dependencies that other people are having on them, and that there's a sort of a reciprocity here.
Excellent, excellent. In our efforts to stay on time, I'm going to wrap this up. I'm going to thank our panelists. Great job. Thank you so much, all three of you, for being part of this discussion. I think we've had a wonderful discussion. These examples, by the way, came from a really good, the WritersGateWay.com, a really good blog on ID that's out there. In December, on December 14th at 12 noon, we will have Kaleem Islam from New York with a presentation on practical project management for instructional designers. And Kaleem has certainly been inundated with this in the last couple years. His firm provides training and learning for the companies that provide the software for the backbone of the stock exchange. So that will be wonderful. We're going to stick around here for a couple minutes, and we will try to pull up John's URL on the solution to the water problem, if we can try to maybe app share that. So we'll be around for a little while if you want to stick around and have a little bit more conversation, but we do try to be very cognizant of people's time and end exactly at 1 o'clock. So once again, folks, thank you very much for joining us. Have a wonderful Thanksgiving, and we will see you back here in December. All right, John, can we try to app share that, JC?
Yeah, probably actually pushing it out as a web link would work better. Let me just grab the link again.
Anybody who's still here have any questions for any of the panelists? Oh, you're welcome, Sue. Thanks for joining us. Hey, if not, that's fine, John. When we, I'm going to shut the archives off. The archives will have the chat in there. Correct?
Yeah, I just tried to push it out as a web link, so hopefully that opened for everybody.
I'm testing out the web link you put into the chat piece, John, and it's just kind of just sitting and spinning, but it could be my internet connection. I'm going to be interested in the practical project management for instructional designers hobby. I actually was asked by Dr. Koff to come back tomorrow and present project management skills and being an instructional designer, and kind of like building yourself a quasi, I guess, PM toolkit that you can have for yourself anywhere you're at. That'll be an interesting presentation to see afterwards. Thanks, Bobby. It was nice meeting you too, Joe.